super. The fewer people on a tour bus, the better, in my opinion. Welcome back to CruiseReport.com Cruise News. I'm Chris Dickman, president of CruiseReport.com. And this is the second in a series where we're going to talk about just some news items that are kind of affecting the cruise industry right now. I picked out a couple of press releases that came across my desk last week, toward the end of the week, and I felt like they were of particular interest to those of us who really enjoy cruising. But before I get into that, I want to address a couple of emails and messages that I got from our last video. For those of you that aren't familiar with CruiseReport.com, we're strictly a consumer cruise website where we feature reviews of cruise products, all kinds of travel, resorts, hotels, airlines, tech products, but primarily related to the cruise industry. I should clarify that we're not a travel agency. We're not affiliated with any travel agency, and we don't sell travel. So I had some people comment on that last week that had never heard of us before. So we don't really have any vested interest in promoting one particular cruise brand over another. But anyway, let's get into the news. I got a press release last week from Crystal Cruises that said that they had basically extended their Crystal Clean 2.0, or Crystal, what do they call it? Crystal Plus, I think. Crystal Clean Plus 2.0 protocols, and that they have now extended this to their river cruise product, the Crystal River Cruises. And I believe I just got one yesterday that said they've also extended it now to their yacht product. So let me just talk a little bit about this. I'm not picking on Crystal in particular because I think a lot of cruise lines are doing something very similar to this. Crystal seems to have it outlined a little better than some others, but I want to go through some of these items that make up these protocols so that you kind of have an understanding of what cruising is going to be like in the future, at least in the near future. So I'm just going to go through a few of these. I'm not going to completely read the press release, but I think there's some points that are kind of interesting and things I want to comment about that I have some concerns about. Let's talk about pre-boarding and embarkation. This is where I have my biggest concerns. Additional precautionary steps taken in the weeks, days, and hours prior to boarding will help streamline and safeguard the embarkation process for all guests and crew. Guests will check in online and complete a health questionnaire. Okay, that's fine. Guests will receive an assigned arrival time to minimize congestion. Probably a good idea. I've never really noticed a problem with congestion on a river cruise. Guests will undergo temperature checks before boarding the ship. I think a lot of cruise lines are going to be doing this now. Guests will complete a second health questionnaire prior to boarding the ship. Okay, more paperwork. Not a big deal one way or the other. Here's the one I have questions about. Guests who show signs of illness may be denied boarding. Now, in and of itself, that's probably a good idea. But what Crystal and other cruise lines that I've looked at with these similar types of measures, and they all say something similar to this. What then? They never really talk about what happens to you once you've been denied boarding. So you paid $10,000 or $20,000 for a cruise. You fly to Europe to get on the cruise, and you have a fever. Maybe you just got a fever on the flight over. Doesn't necessarily mean you have COVID. Doesn't necessarily mean you have the flu. You just have a fever. Doesn't matter. Or maybe you have a cough. I don't know what their protocols are as far as determining when and how and why you would be denied boarding. But the fact is, if you are denied boarding, then what happens? Because now you're in a situation where your return flight is probably not for a week to 14 days after the cruise. So you'll either be faced with rebooking a new flight at an additional expense, or you will be faced with hotel room for 7 to 14 days. That additional expense, and what about the money you paid for the cruise? Will you receive future cruise credit if you're denied boarding, or are you just out that money? And it's not perfectly clear yet how travel insurance is going to deal with this. Now, travel insurance will cover your medical expenses if you're removed from the ship or denied boarding and you have to go to the hospital or you have to receive some sort of medical treatment. Your travel insurance will pay for that. But what about the cruise you never got to take? So that's one of my questions is what happens if you go to Europe or anywhere and you're denied boarding on a ship that you've paid for a cruise? Do you get future cruise credit? I wish a cruise line would answer that question because I don't know that they've developed a policy yet for that or how they're going to deal with it. But it's something that is important to me, and it's something I think a lot of people are going to want to know about. So let's go on through some of the other things. Capacity control and social distancing. Crystal ships are designed to offer, this is mostly marketing stuff, reduced capacity in all social spaces, fine with me. Social distancing outside of one's travel party will be required. Again, that's fine with me. So I guess that means if you're traveling, say, 4 to a group, you can get together at a table, but your table would have to be distanced from any other tables with other parties. That's fine. Disinfection procedures. Prior to guest arrival, staterooms and suites will be thoroughly cleaned and disinfected with medical-grade disinfectants. Products used are included on the EPA list in, so just basically they're going to clean the ship and the staterooms with the right kind of products. Electrostatic foggers will be used as an additional tool for disinfection on embarkation day. That's good. I have no problem with any of this. Guest corridors will be disinfected regularly. Timely housekeeping for suite turnover. Bed sheets, linens, professionally cleaned and disinfected at high temperatures. I think a lot of these things were probably already being done. They're just now talking about it. I have never, with maybe 1 or 2 exceptions, been on any cruise ship that I felt like was not being maintained and cleaned pretty thoroughly, especially the modern ships. So I just, I'm sure a lot of this is stuff that they've always done. They've just now put it down into writing. Responsive, there's a few other things. A responsive mask policy. Crystal will provide masks to its guests and crew. Masks will be required in venues and instances where proper distancing is not possible. I'm not sure on a river cruise where that would be. On a big cruise ship, I can think, for example, the theater might be a situation. Certainly tender boats, depending on how full they're going to allow the tenders to be. That certainly is a very crowded situation. Crystal will comply with all destination health authorities, which may require masks ashore. I don't think they really have a choice. So I think you'd have to comply. Food and beverage. Open seating dining will continue with social distancing considerations. No problem. Guest seating will ensure ample spacing. Contact-free dining service will be implemented in all onboard venues. Now, I think what that means is no more self-service buffets. You won't just be able to go up and grab, a sweet roll in the morning or whatever. You'll have to have a waiter bring you whatever it is you want, which is a little bit of a challenge on a riverboat because generally breakfast and lunch is always buffet style. So it's going to be a real strain on the staff to actually get the food for everybody and bring it to them. That's going to be an interesting challenge for them to meet. But I don't have a problem with it. I could care less about buffets. I know some people absolutely love self-service buffets. Ricky and I have always kind of had an anti-buffet sentiment. We've always felt like that's one of the places on all the ships where diseases can spread because everybody's touching those utensils. I've never felt comfortable with self-service buffets. So I actually like this policy. I'm okay with it. Self-service options will be eliminated. That was the next thing. So that's pretty much what I said. Now, on a river cruise, usually there's a 24-hour, and a lot of ships have this, there's a 24-hour station where you can get coffee, self-service coffee. There's like a little coffee bar. And a lot of times they'll have cookies or, little snacks. So it's going to be real interesting to see if that is going to be manned 24 hours a day. So that you can still get coffee 24 hours a day if you want a cup of coffee or tea or whatever. I'll be curious to know how they deal with that. Stringent procurement guidelines will be enforced. Okay, I don't think that's a big deal. Now, then we have shoreside partners and excursions, tour coaches, which are exclusive to Crystal River Cruises, guests only, will be disinfected to meet Crystal Clean Plus standards. I can read this a couple of ways. Are they saying that the tour coaches, only the ones that are exclusive to Crystal River Cruises, will be disinfected? Or are they implying that all of their coaches are exclusive to Crystal River Cruises? I don't know. You could read that both ways. I didn't even realize that Crystal had their own tour buses. I know Tauk does. I know Viking has some. But even on some of these cruise lines in certain destinations, they don't necessarily have their own motor coaches. So when it says which are exclusive to Crystal River Cruises, guests only, I assume they mean these are coaches that are only being used for them, but I don't know if that's the case 100% of the time. Excursion group sizes will be reduced to allow for proper social distancing. Super. The fewer people on a tour bus, the better, in my opinion. Crystal will monitor port regulations and adjust requirements and schedule. Okay, that's basically, we already know all they're going to do all that. Shoreside medical resources. Crystal River ships are always close to shore and therefore are treated like landside hotels. The company will facilitate care of guests with local hospitals and doctors and will follow all local healthcare guidelines and practices. Now, this is something I feel like most river cruise companies have been doing all along, especially a river cruise where you're never more than literally 10 or 15 minutes from another little town or city along the shoreline. In fact, there's highways usually going up and down the rivers. So I don't think that's really a new feature. I think that's something that's been around all along, and I'm sure these river cruise companies have relationships with all these local community hospitals, just in case they need to pull over and dock somewhere, offload a passenger or a guest, and be able to provide some medical attention. So I don't know that that's a new thing. I think that's probably something they've been doing all along. And then they have crew member standards and practices, and it's basically saying that crew members are going to be tested regularly. They'll be tested before they're allowed to embark. All of these are good things. You can see this in complete document on our website, cruisereport.com. I'll make sure to put a link in the description of this video. If you want to go and read all of these protocols for yourself, you might be interested. And like I say, a lot of cruise lines are doing this as well. Now, they also say that Crystal River ships will feature HEPA filters, which remove 99.95% of airborne pathogens. This raises an interesting question about the use of masks, because even an N95 mask only removes down to, I believe, 0.25 microns. And I believe the coronavirus can go down as small as 0.08 microns. So there's some question out there that whether N95 masks really provide you the protection that you would need against a virus like this. Probably an unpopular position for me to even say that, but you can do the research on your own and find that. So, and then it just goes on to some other marketing things, but I found it kind of interesting, and I think you might want to read that on our website. The other news item that I found very interesting, and I touched on this in my last video, is from Uncruise Adventures. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Uncruise, it's a small ship cruise line, and their ships tend to be a little older, but they're smaller. I think their biggest ship only holds 70 or 80 people. We've been on a few of their ships. We love Uncruise. We like the small ship experience. And in fact, I think the small ship cruising, river ships, sailing vessels, I think they're going to actually be the big winners in all of this COVID situation, because it's much easier to manage a crisis on a small ship than it is on a large ship. And it's also much easier to manage large crowds because you don't have large crowds on a small ship. But nevertheless, in my last video, I talked about how Uncruise had an Alaska sailing with 36 people on board, and it had to end after 3 days because of a COVID situation. Well, they came out with a press release, and it's very, very interesting how they framed this press release. And again, that's on our website, cruisereport.com. I'll put a link in the description down below. But they give a timeline of events. And I'm just going to read through the timeline real quickly because I think it's very interesting how this turned out much differently than a lot of people would have expected. On July 28th, identified guest takes a test prior to departure from his home city or her home city. That was on July 28th. On August 1st, and they tested negative. On August 1st, Uncruise Adventures returns to sail, and all guests with a gap of more than 72-hour requirement were retested at the Juneau airport. So everybody flew into Juneau. I said Anchorage before, it was actually Juneau. And everybody with more than a 72-hour gap from when they were tested got retested. On August 4th, a guest on board received communication from the state of Alaska of a positive COVID-19 test retaken at the airport. So this is a guest that had previously tested negative, flies to Juneau, and now they took a test at the Juneau airport, and now they test positive. On that same day, August the 4th, contact tracing was immediately implemented by the state. On the same day, August 4th, the identified guest and 4 traveling companions were retested on board the Uncruise vessel by their trained staff. Now, Uncruise ships are small ships. They don't have a dedicated doctor, but usually the first officer or the captain or somebody has some EMT or medical training. And the reason I know that is because I had a situation several years ago in Alaska where I actually broke a couple of ribs. Had nothing to do with them, but I do recall at the time the first officer came by the stateroom and he had a stethoscope and had medical training, so on and so forth. Okay, August 5th, the next day, the 60-person vessel Wilderness Adventurer, which I think is the ship we were on in Alaska, returned to Juneau. It was operating at 60% occupancy cap or limit. So that means 60% of 60 would be 36. They had 36 people on board. August 5th, the next day after they got the notification from the state, all guests were securely quarantined at a local hotel in Juneau, with all the costs covered by Uncruise Adventures. Now, they told right there what happened when they had to stop the cruise and they had to offload the guests. They didn't leave it up to me to try to figure out, were these people on their own? Did they have to pay for this? Uncruise took care of it. Very good press release and very good policy of how they handled that. The crew was quarantined on the vessel. On August the 6th, this is 2 days after they were notified, all guests and crew were tested. On August 7th, Uncruise Adventures received negative results back on all tests. 30 of the 36 guests were green-lighted by the state of Alaska to be released. On August 8th, guests began flying home. Now, this is real interesting because what it means is one guest tested positive. He was traveling, he or she were traveling in a group with 4 people, and nobody else ended up with the COVID virus. It did not spread on board the ship. So all of this hype and talk about coronavirus and ships being a petri dish for spreading the virus, in this particular case, Here's somebody that tested positive at the Juneau airport, spent 3 days on the ship in a party of 4 and with the other 36 guests. And apparently the virus didn't spread to anybody else. Now that's very good news. No matter who you are or how you like to cruise, this is a good news story for the cruise industry. All of us are wondering when and or if are we ever going to get back on a cruise ship. And it's looking more and more like that's probably not going to happen until 2021 at the best. I think the cruise lines and a lot of businesses might be hanging their hat on the notion that there's going to be a vaccine coming soon, and that once the vaccine is released, there'll be a big celebration and, everything will be wonderful and we can all go do everything we wanted to do and everything we used to do. I am not that optimistic when it comes to the vaccine. And the only reason I'm not that optimistic is because there's never been a vaccine for a coronavirus, ever. So this will be the first one. And if it comes out, it would be done in record time if it actually comes out before the end of the year. I know our president is very optimistic that a vaccine will appear, but I just don't know if that's going to happen. So right now, I don't think anybody knows what the total situation is going to be for 2021. 2020 looks kind of like a bust. I do think small ship cruising, river cruising, smaller vessels are going to be more appealing to people than they were in the past. The idea of getting on a ship with 900 guests or 600 guests or 100 guests is much less intimidating in these times than getting on a ship with 3,000 other people or 2,000 other people. But we shall see how this all works out. So I would love your comments down below. I would like to know what your thoughts are on Crystal's clean protocols, and do you have those same concerns? If you are denied boarding on a ship, what happens? How much financial hit are you going to take? These are questions that need to be answered. I thought Uncruise did a very good job of answering, because when they had to cancel the cruise early, they covered everybody's hotel rooms. Very, very nice. So let's put the comments down below. I'd love to know what you think about this. And let me know again if you want more videos like this, if you want me to talk about cruise news of the week, and be more than happy to accommodate that. Thanks again for joining me today on cruisereport.com. And hopefully we'll all be cruising soon.